Since the Nikon ZR has got the RED logo slapped on it, I was curious to see how it stacks up to the much more expensive RED V-Raptor. This is of course a very unfair comparison, but the comparison surprisingly left me very pleased with my purchase of the ZR. I used this camera for a sit-down interview which lasted for about 2 hours straight, and the footage that I was left with was massive. But if you compare all that to the RED V-Raptor, which is 8K in MQ compression, which is the second highest quality possible in this camera, it can actually record for about twice as long as both the Nikon ZR and the DJI Ronin 4D. So I definitely do think that the Nikon ZR can come up with some compression rates, since the RED V-Raptor is about 2K higher resolution as well. So between the Nikon ZR and the RED V-Raptor, I honestly can't say that one is the better image than the other, and that's honestly very impressive from the fact that the Nikon ZR is a $2,200 camera compared to the V-Raptor, which is about 10 times that. A place where there actually is a difference is in the colors. I'm showing you two images of me sitting next to a window. Both the cameras was set to the same settings and both were using the same lens and placed on the same tripod to get as familiar image as possible. I have no clear favorite, but the Nikon seems to lean a little greener and more cyan, while the RED stays more neutral. Even though I would argue that the image quality difference of these cameras are not that obvious, I did try to stress test them quite a bit to see the differences in dynamic range. I had Daniel Gall from Gall Films, who owns this camera, stand indoor in this restaurant where the windows are clearly visible in the background, and there's blown out highlight bulbs indoor as well. We exposed for the skin tones to be just a little bit under to be able to see more into the highlights of the bulbs and in the window. Yet, when I punch in on the light bulbs, I would say that the overexposed light bulbs looks about the same on both cameras, which kind of shocked me, thinking that the RED would have a lot more detail. Even when bringing the ISO down to 100 in post on both of these cameras, the highlight roll-off looks about the same to my untrained eye. It's the same story when zooming into the overexposed window in the back. By adjusting the ISO from 800 to 100 on both cameras, you'll finally see that the dynamic range in the highlights is better on the RED than on the Nikon. But it's not as great of a difference as I would have thought. It is, however, in the shadows that I see a clear advantage of the RED V-Raptor over the Nikon. In the RED footage, you can clearly see my skin tones down on my neck and alongside my cheek, but with the Nikon, all of that is just too unexposed to be visible. The noise levels is as well much higher on the ZR. But if we go back to the skin tones test and zoom in 500%, we'll see more of this bad noise in the shadow side of my face, even in a well-lit environment like this. In this close-up, it definitely looks much sharper on the RED 8K image compared to the ZR's 6K footage. But this might just be that the focus point moved a little bit during our testing. And if you manage to look past the fact that the focus point of the ZR is set to the outside and the RED is set to the indoor, the amount of details and noise in the shadows is night and day between the two cameras. Since the RED does so well with the shadows, you might think that it's a low light beast as well. Well, you're wrong. The Nikon has a second base ISO of 6400 in addition to having native ISO of 800. I find this to be the perfect range for a camera like this, allowing for indoor recording without needing to crank the ISO and darken lit environments without the need of ND filters. The RED V-Raptor, however, only has the one native ISO of 800. I also threw in some footage from DJI, which looks even better, but it has a native ISO of 5000 instead of the 6400 of the Nikon. So the Nikon ZR stacks very well against the bigger RED V-Raptor. The highlights looks comparable on both cameras, but the Nikon ZR falls short on the shadow side of the dynamic range. But something that really surprised me, however, was the fact that the data rates of the RED R3D RAW of the RED V-Raptor in 8K resolution with the MQ compression was about half of that of the Nikon ZR in 6K. This needs to be fixed. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing and have a good one.